Canada is facing an unprecedented moment. On one side, the United States is laying down threats, targeting the nation's most crucial industries, from auto manufacturing to electric vehicles. On the other, China is offering an economic lifeline that could restore billions in trade, but only if Canada makes a bold move. For decades, Ottawa has followed Washington's lead, copying policies meant to protect American interests, but never Canada's. Now, for the first time in decades, a real choice is staring the country in the face: continue following or step up and define its own destiny. Trump's administration has made it clear the U.S. will always prioritize its own auto industry, even if it costs Canada dearly. Meanwhile, Beijing has laid out a simple proposition: lift the tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and China will remove its punitive tariffs on Canadian canola, opening markets worth billions. It's a crossroads with stakes far beyond trade numbers. Jobs, farmers, consumers, and the very identity of the nation are on the line. Will Canada continue as a follower, or will it finally chart its own course in the global economy? And as these powerful nations clash through threats and incentives, ordinary Canadians are watching, wondering what the fallout will be and who will emerge stronger. This is more than a story of tariffs and diplomacy. It's a story about sovereignty, strategy, and the chance to rewrite the rules of engagement. It all began with a sharp warning from the United States. Howard Lutnick, Trump's Commerce Secretary, made it clear that the American government had only one priority: its own auto industry. Speaking behind closed doors in Toronto, Lutnick hinted that Canadian assembly operations might need to move south. Ontario Premier Doug Ford didn't mince words, calling the statements a massive threat. For decades, Canada and the U.S. have operated as a tightly linked North American automotive ecosystem, but these words revealed a shift. Canada was no longer a partner but a competitor. Every remark was calculated, a clear signal that Washington intended to reclaim its manufacturing dominance, even if it meant dismantling decades of cooperation. The threat was not abstract. It carried weight, with consequences that could touch every province and impact jobs, communities, and industries across the country. Suddenly, Canada was caught between diplomacy and economic warfare. The United States was showing its hand, making it clear that loyalty to Washington would not be enough to shield Canadian industries from scrutiny or disruption. But while the Americans flexed their muscles through threats, another power quietly entered the arena, offering a solution wrapped in opportunity rather than intimidation. And that alternative would soon force Canada to rethink everything it had been doing in the trade war. While Washington leaned heavily on threats and intimidation, China took a very different approach, quietly presenting Canada with a tantalizing opportunity. The Chinese ambassador delivered a clear and direct message. If Canada removed its 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, Beijing would immediately lift all retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola. This was not a vague diplomatic gesture. It was a concrete, billions of dollars proposition with immediate implications for farmers, consumers, and the domestic economy. Suddenly, Ottawa found itself at a crossroads. On one side, the United States was flexing its muscles, threatening Canadian auto manufacturing, jobs, and decades of cross-border cooperation. On the other, China was offering a reward for boldness, a chance to restore a critical agricultural market that had been blocked for years due to prior retaliatory policies. The contrast could not have been starker. One superpower pushed with coercion, the other pulled with incentive. For Canadian leaders, the decision was no longer abstract. It was a real-world choice between continuing to follow Washington's lead, a path that had repeatedly cost Canada billions and left its farmers and taxpayers exposed, or seizing a strategic opportunity to strengthen the nation's economy while reclaiming sovereignty in trade matters. Beyond the immediate financial gains, lifting EV tariffs could also signal that Canada would no longer act as a mere echo of American policy. It could demonstrate independence, strategic thinking, and a willingness to prioritize national interest over political loyalty. Yet this path came with risks. Lifting the tariffs would require Ottawa to navigate a delicate balance, engaging with China without triggering a diplomatic fallout with Washington, reassuring domestic industries, and managing public perception. Still, the potential upside was enormous. Billions restored to Canadian farmers, access to affordable EVs for consumers, and the chance to attract cutting-edge manufacturing investment directly to Canadian soil. Canada had rarely faced such a clear, high-stakes choice: continue being pressured or take the bold step toward economic autonomy. The coming decision would shape not only trade, but the nation's identity on the global stage. Canada's current dilemma didn't arise overnight. For years, Ottawa had followed Washington's lead, often at significant cost to its own industries and citizens. A prime example is the 100% tariff Canada imposed on Chinese electric vehicles, a move made to align with U.S. policy and show loyalty to its southern neighbor. At the time, the rationale seemed straightforward: protect North American auto manufacturers and support the narrative of a united trade front. But what seemed like a protective measure quickly revealed itself as a double-edged sword. China's response was swift and severe. Retaliatory tariffs on Canadian agricultural products, particularly canola, cut off a crucial market worth billions to farmers in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. What had been intended as alignment with a powerful ally became a costly burden. Farmers faced losses, subsidies became necessary, and everyday Canadians felt the impact indirectly through rising costs and economic strain. Tom Mueller's observation hit the mark. Canada was paying the price for a problem it hadn't created, following policies that primarily benefited the United States, not itself. This wasn't just about money, it was about missed opportunities. Every time Canada mirrored U.S. policy, it sacrificed economic leverage and strategic independence. The lesson was clear. Loyalty to Washington did not guarantee protection, only dependence. Now, with China offering a tangible incentive to remove EV tariffs, the contrast couldn't be starker. What had once been an abstract policy choice had real-world consequences for farmers, consumers, and the broader economy. The stakes were no longer theoretical. Canada had a chance to reclaim billions in trade, restore domestic confidence, and assert its own priorities. Lifting the tariffs could revitalize agriculture, open doors to affordable electric vehicles, and signal a shift from passive follower to proactive leader. The question looming over Ottawa was unavoidable. Continue paying the cost of blind loyalty, or finally take a stand in Canada's own national interest? The decision would define not only the economy, but Canada's ability to act independently on the global stage. China's offer wasn't just a polite suggestion. It was a clear, high-stakes opportunity for Canada to regain control over its own economic destiny. The message from Beijing was simple: remove tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and China would reciprocate by lifting its retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola. For farmers in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, this could mean the return of a market worth billions. For consumers, it could mean access to affordable, modern EVs reshaping the transportation landscape. For the nation as a whole, it represented a chance to reclaim leverage that had long been eroded by following U.S. directives. The strategic implications were significant. Rather than relying on foreign instructions, Canada could attract EV manufacturers to invest directly on its soil, creating jobs in Windsor, Oshawa, and Quebec, and utilizing Canadian steel, technology, and labor. This move would protect local industries while fostering innovation, signaling to the world that Canada can negotiate from a position of strength rather than passive obedience. The choice was clear. Leverage this moment to strengthen domestic capabilities and restore economic independence, or risk continued dependence and vulnerability by sticking rigidly to policies dictated by Washington. But the opportunity wasn't without its challenges. Lifting tariffs meant balancing relations with both the United States and China, managing domestic perception, and ensuring industries could pivot to take advantage of the new policy. Yet the potential benefits far outweighed the risks. By embracing China's offer strategically, Canada could restore billions in agricultural trade, protect domestic employment, and attract investment in emerging technologies. Ultimately, this wasn't just a matter of trade, it was a test of sovereignty. Could Canada make a decision based solely on its national interest, rather than external pressures? The choice carried enormous implications, not just for the economy, but for Canada's global identity, signaling a potential shift from follower to leader in international trade. The coming decision would reveal whether Ottawa is ready to assert its independence or continue paying the price of past loyalties. While China dangled opportunity, the United States continued to flex its economic muscle, making it abundantly clear that Canadian industries were not untouchable. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick's statements left no room for doubt. If necessary, American automakers could be pulled south, and Canadian assembly lines risked being dismantled. The message was direct and chilling: jobs, communities, and decades of cross-border collaboration could all be disrupted if Ottawa failed to comply. Suddenly, Canada's auto industry was not just a sector, but a strategic chess piece in a high-stakes game of continental power and influence. For Ottawa, the dilemma was stark. Protecting domestic manufacturing meant resisting pressure from the United States, a superpower with decades of economic leverage. Bowing to Washington could mean continued dependence, vulnerability, and a reinforcement of the very policies that had cost Canada billions in the past. Every move carried consequences. Preserving jobs and industry stability was critical, yet so was maintaining political and trade relations with a dominant neighbor. The risk of miscalculation was immense, and the margin for error almost non-existent. Meanwhile, China's offer presented a contrasting scenario, one that emphasized opportunity over coercion. Lifting EV tariffs could unlock billions in agricultural trade, restore a market vital to Canadian farmers, and attract cutting-edge EV manufacturing investment directly to Canadian soil. It was a path that allowed Canada to safeguard domestic employment, strengthen its economy, and assert strategic independence. The choice could not have been clearer. Continue to follow the United States' lead, risking stagnation and dependence, or embrace a calculated risk with China that promised economic gain and strategic autonomy. The stakes extended far beyond tariffs. They touched the very core of Canada's economic identity and sovereignty. The next move would determine not just the future of the auto sector, but the nation's ability to navigate the pressures of two global powers while protecting its people, industries, and long-term prosperity. At its core, the dilemma Canada faces is about far more than tariffs or trade numbers. It's a question of sovereignty. For decades, Ottawa has allowed U.S. priorities to dictate its own economic policies, following directives that served American interests while leaving Canadians to shoulder the consequences. Now a rare and unprecedented choice has emerged: continue as a follower or seize an opportunity to assert independence and act decisively in the nation's own interest. The stakes could not be higher. Lifting tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles is more than a technical policy shift. It's a strategic move that could restore billions in agricultural trade, revitalize the domestic economy, and signal to the world that Canada can negotiate on its own terms. Beyond economics, it's a chance to reshape the nation's identity. No longer a country whose policies echo Washington, but one that charts its own course, guided by reason, opportunity, and long-term benefit. The decision also has domestic implications. By embracing China's offer strategically, Canada could attract EV manufacturers to invest directly in cities like Windsor, Oshawa, and Quebec, creating jobs and fostering innovation. Canadian steel, labor, and technology would benefit, turning a simple trade decision into a comprehensive strategy for economic empowerment. At the same time, Ottawa would need to manage potential diplomatic friction with the United States, balancing the benefits of newfound independence against the risks of pushback from a superpower. Ultimately, the choice between loyalty and sovereignty is a test of national courage. It requires stepping out of the shadow of a dominant neighbor, reclaiming control over economic destiny, and signaling that Canadian interests come first. This isn't merely about trade. It's about whether Canada will act decisively, innovate boldly, and lead strategically, or continue paying the cost of blind allegiance. The moment to decide has arrived, and the path chosen will define the nation's future for years to come. Canada now stands at a historic crossroads, a moment that could define the nation's economic trajectory and its place on the global stage for decades to come. On one side lies continued alignment with the United States, a path that promises predictability but also dependency. Following Washington's lead has repeatedly proven costly. Canadian farmers have lost billions in trade, domestic industries have been constrained, and ordinary Canadians have borne the financial consequences. Yet staying loyal to the U.S. appears familiar, even safe, a continuation of decades-long policies that ensure minimal friction with a powerful neighbor. On the other side, there is China's offer. Remove the tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and Beijing will lift its retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola. This is more than a trade proposition. It's a strategic lever that could restore a critical market for Canadian farmers, create jobs through domestic EV investment, and inject innovation into the economy. It is a chance to reclaim control, assert sovereignty, and demonstrate that Canada can act decisively in its own interest. But such a move comes with calculated risks. Potential diplomatic pushback from Washington, domestic scrutiny, and the challenge of navigating two global powers simultaneously. The stakes are clear. By embracing China's offer strategically, Canada could transition from a follower to a leader, signaling to the world that it will not simply echo the policies of others. This decision would reshape trade, restore confidence in domestic industries, and establish Canada as a nation willing to prioritize its own people and future. The question is no longer theoretical. It is immediate and consequential. Will Ottawa continue to bow to external pressures? Or will it seize this rare opportunity to act boldly, reclaim economic autonomy, and rewrite its role in the global economy? The choice made here will resonate far beyond trade deals, defining Canada's identity, strategy, and sovereignty for years to come. Canada has reached a moment that could redefine its place on the global stage. For decades, The nation has mirrored U.S. policies, hoping that loyalty would secure stability and protection. Yet every time Ottawa followed Washington's lead, it came at a cost. Farmers lost critical markets, domestic industries faced constraints, and ordinary Canadians bore the financial burden. Copying U.S. trade policy was never about protecting Canada's interests. It was about political alignment, and now the consequences are clear. Enter China, offering a bold and unprecedented alternative. Remove the tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and Beijing will lift its retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola, opening markets worth billions. Beyond numbers, this represents a chance for Canada to reclaim control of its economy, attract domestic EV investment, create jobs, and strengthen industries that have long been overshadowed by external pressures. For the first time in decades, Ottawa can make a decision entirely on its own terms, guided by strategy, opportunity, and national interest rather than political allegiance. The implications go far beyond trade. This is a test of sovereignty, identity, and leadership. Canada can finally step out from Washington's shadow and show the world that it can negotiate from strength, innovate boldly, and act decisively for its people. Choosing this path would not be a sign of weakness, but of calculated courage. A declaration that Canada is capable of defining its own future, protecting its citizens, and setting its own rules in a complex global economy. The choice before Ottawa is historic and consequential. Will Canada continue as a follower, paying the price of blind loyalty, or will it embrace opportunity, assert independence, and reclaim its sovereignty? The answer will shape the economy, the nation's identity, and its role in the world for years to come. The stakes could not be higher, and the opportunity for bold leadership has never been clearer. Canada's next move will determine whether it continues to stand in the shadow of others, or finally steps into the light, as a nation that leads with vision, strategy, and self-respect.